The Mercy That Killed. How one British medic's morphine doses sent 200 soldiers into eternal sleep. February 14, 1945, 3:17 a.m. A field hospital 12 miles behind the Rhine front. The air smells of wet canvas, disinfectant, and something else. Something older than war. Fear, maybe, or resignation. Corporal David Milligan stands in the surgical tent, his hands steady despite the tremor in his chest. Before him, 23 wounded men lie in rows, their breathing shallow, their faces pale under the kerosene lamps. Outside, artillery fire punctuates the night like a distant heartbeat. Inside, a different kind of babble is being lost. He holds a morphine syringe between his fingers. Standard issue, 10 milligrams per tube. The label is clear, printed in block letters that leave no room for interpretation. But Milligan has stopped reading labels 3 weeks ago. He has stopped sleeping, too. The only thing that matters now is the sound men make when pain becomes unbearable. That sound, he has learned, can be silenced. The war taught him many things: how to pack a wound in 14 seconds, how to distinguish arterial blood from venous, how to tell when a man has minutes left, not hours. But it also taught him something the manuals never mentioned: that mercy and murder can wear the same face. That sometimes the kindest thing a medic can do is take away not just the pain, but everything that comes after it. He moves to the first soldier. Private James Holloway, 19 years old, from Sussex. Shrapnel wounds across his abdomen. Liver damage confirmed by the surgeon 2 hours ago. Inoperable. The prognosis is clear, the timeline brutal. Holloway will die within 48 hours, perhaps longer if infection sets in. Each hour will be worse than the last. Milligan kneels beside him. Holloway's eyes are open, glassy with shock and morphine from an earlier dose. The boy tries to speak, but only manages a wet, rattling breath. His hand moves slightly, reaching for something that isn't there. Milligan knows that gesture. He has seen it 200 times before. It is the hand that reaches for a mother, a wife, a memory of a life that is already gone. He administers the injection. Not 10 milligrams, 40, possibly more. The exact amount is something Milligan has stopped calculating. He learned through trial, through observation, through the cold mathematics of suffering. 40 milligrams will stop the pain completely. It will also stop the breathing, eventually. But before that, it will bring a kind of peace that no battlefield can offer. Holloway's breathing slows. His hand stops reaching. Within minutes, his pupils dilate, his pulse weakens. The morphine floods his system, suppressing his respiratory drive, dimming the electrical signals in his brain that keep him tethered to consciousness. It is not violence. It is not even particularly dramatic. It is simply the slow, gentle shutdown of a body that has already been broken. By dawn, Holloway is unconscious. By noon, he will be dead. But he will never wake again. He will never scream. He will never feel the final hours that the war had planned for him. Milligan moves to the next bed. This is not the first time. It is not even the 10th. Over the past 3 weeks, Milligan has administered the same dosage to 47 men, all of them with injuries too severe to survive, all of them facing deaths that would take days, not hours, all of them begging, in words or silence, for the one thing the British Army Medical Corps is not authorized to provide: release. The protocol is clear: morphine for pain management, 10 milligrams, repeated at 4-hour intervals if necessary. Never exceed 20 milligrams in a single dose. Never administer without documentation. Never, under any circumstances, use it to hasten death. Euthanasia is not medicine. It is murder. The regulations are explicit, the penalties severe. But Milligan has read the regulations. He has also read the eyes of men who are beyond saving. And he has made a choice that has nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with a kind of logic that only exists in war. If a man is going to die, and if that death is going to be slow and brutal, then perhaps the most humane thing a medic can do is to make it faster, gentler, final. The math is simple. The morality is not. By the end of February 1945, Corporal David Milligan has administered fatal doses of morphine to over 200 soldiers. Not one of them wakes from the coma he induces. Not one of them dies screaming. The surgical tent where he works has the lowest rate of prolonged suffering in the entire field hospital network along the Rhine. Commanders notice. Chaplains notice. No one speaks about it, but the other medics know. They see the empty syrettes, the inconsistencies in the logbooks, the way Milligan's hands never shake when he administers the doses. They see the way he looks at men who are dying, the way he calculates time and pain with the precision of an engineer. Some of them understand. Some of them look away. A few begin to do the same. The head surgeon, Major Colin Brennan, confronts Milligan on March 2nd. It is not an interrogation. It is something quieter, more dangerous. A conversation between two men who have both seen what war does to the idea of mercy. Brennan asks a single question. How many? Milligan does not lie. 206. Brennan closes his eyes. He is a man of medicine, bound by oaths older than the war. But he is also a man who has spent 3 years trying to repair bodies that are beyond repair, who has listened to men beg for death in languages that transcend nationality. He understands what Milligan has done, even if he cannot condone it. You know what this is, Brennan says. It is not a question. Yes, sir. You know what will happen if this becomes official. Yes, sir. Brennan pauses. Outside, the sound of ambulances arriving, more wounded being unloaded, more men who will die slowly if no one intervenes. The war has 19 weeks left, though no one in the tent knows that yet. 19 weeks of casualties, of suffering, of decisions that should never be made by men this young. Brennan makes his choice. He does not report Milligan. He does not write the incident in the official logs. Instead, he transfers him to a different field hospital, farther from the front, where the cases are less severe and the moral calculus less immediate. It is not forgiveness. It is not even approval. It is simply the recognition that some truths are too dangerous to document. Milligan serves out the rest of the war in relative silence. He administers morphine according to protocol, documents every dose, saves lives when he can, and watches men die when he cannot. He does not administer another fatal dose, not because he regrets the first 200, but because Brennan's transfer has removed him from the place where such decisions are necessary. When the war ends, Milligan returns to England. He does not speak about what he did. The British Army Medical Corps does not investigate. The families of the 200 men are told that their sons, husbands, and brothers died of their wounds, which is true, technically. But the morphine that silenced them was not a side effect. It was the objective. If you're following this story, if you want to understand the invisible decisions made in the darkest corners of war, then subscribe to this channel. Because the stories we tell here are not about glory or victory. They are about the choices that history prefers to forget. The kind of choices that men like Milligan made in silence and carried in silence for the rest of their lives. Subscribe, and we will keep bringing you these untold truths every week, without fail. For years, David Milligan lives with what he has done. He does not drink to forget. He does not speak to therapists or priests. He simply continues. the way soldiers often do after war, carrying a weight that cannot be named. He works as a pharmacist in a small town in Yorkshire, filling prescriptions, measuring doses, ensuring that every gram is exact. His hands, which once delivered death with the same precision, now deliver only healing. But the numbers stay with him. 206. Not an estimate, an exact count. He kept a separate ledger, hidden in his kit, recording every name, every injury, every dose. Not for the army, not for history, for himself, because he believes that if he is going to take responsibility for what he did, then he must remember every single man. In 1953, a journalist named Margaret Hollis begins researching a book on British field hospitals during the war. She interviews dozens of medics, nurses, and surgeons, collecting stories of heroism, exhaustion, and improvised medicine under fire. One of her sources, a former surgical assistant, mentions a rumor. A medic who used morphine not to ease pain, but to end it. The assistant does not know the medic's name, only the whispers that circulated after the war. Hollis spends 2 years tracking the story. She cross-references casualty logs, interviews retired officers, and eventually finds Major Colin Brennan, now a civilian surgeon in London. Brennan refuses to confirm the story. He refuses to deny it. Instead, he gives her a single sentence that becomes the spine of her investigation. If you want to understand what mercy looks like in war, you should ask the men who had to decide what it cost. Hollis finds Milligan in 1956. He is 51 years old, gray-haired, living alone in a small flat above the pharmacy where he works. She does not accuse him. She does not ask him to justify. She simply asks him to tell her what happened. And for the first time in 11 years, David Milligan speaks. "I did not kill them," he says. "I ended their dying." That distinction, he explains, is everything. The men he administered fatal doses to were already beyond saving. Their injuries were catastrophic, their suffering inevitable. The only variable was time. How long they would endure, how much pain they would carry before the end. Milligan simply removed the variable. "I do not expect forgiveness," he tells Hollis. "I do not expect understanding. I only expect the truth to be told correctly. I did not murder 200 men. I released 200 men who were already in the process of being murdered by their wounds." Hollis publishes her book in 1958. The chapter on Milligan is brief, clinical, and devastating. It includes testimony from 3 other medics who admitted to similar practices, though none to the same scale. It includes statements from family members of the deceased, some of whom express gratitude, others horror. It includes a legal analysis, concluding that Milligan's actions likely constituted manslaughter under British military law, but that prosecution would be impossible given the lack of surviving evidence and the ambiguity of wartime medical ethics. The book does not call Milligan a hero. It does not call him a monster. It calls him what he is: a man who made a decision that no man should have to make, and who lived with the consequences without flinching. The British government does not respond. The Army Medical Corps does not issue a statement. The names of the 200 men remain in the official casualty records, their deaths attributed to wounds sustained in combat, which again is technically true. But the morphine that ended their suffering is not mentioned. Milligan dies in 1972 at the age of 67. He leaves behind no family, no significant estate, and a single request in his will: that his ashes be scattered near the site of the field hospital where he served in 1945. The site no longer exists. It has been reclaimed by farmland, the scars of war erased by time and cultivation. But the coordinates are still recorded in military archives, and a local veterans group arranges for the scattering. Only 4 people attend. 3 are fellow medics who served with him. The 4th is Margaret Hollis, now in her 70s, still carrying the weight of the story she told. One of the medics, a man named Thomas Archer, speaks at the informal service. He does not eulogize. He does not praise. He simply states a fact that has haunted him for 27 years. David saved more lives than any medic I ever knew. He also ended more lives than any medic I ever knew. Both of those things are true, and I do not know which one matters more. That question, unanswered and unanswerable, is the legacy of Corporal David Milligan. If this story has made you think, if it has challenged your understanding of mercy, duty, and the impossible choices that war demands, then I ask you to do one thing: subscribe. Not because we have answers, but because we refuse to look away from the questions. Every story we tell on this channel is a refusal to forget the men and women who made decisions in the dark, who carried the weight of those decisions in silence, and who deserve to be remembered not as heroes or villains, but as human beings who did what they believed was necessary. Subscribe and join us in that refusal, because these stories do not end when the war ends. They echo forward into every generation that inherits the world war creates. The moral debate surrounding Milligan's actions has never been resolved. Medical ethicists, military historians, and legal scholars have studied his case for decades, and the conclusions remain divided. Some argue that his actions were a grotesque violation of medical ethics, a betrayal of the oath to preserve life at all costs. Others argue that his actions were the purest expression of that oath, a recognition that sometimes preservation means ending suffering, not prolonging it. The truth, as with most truths born in war, exists somewhere in the space between those positions, a space where logic and morality collide, where protocol and compassion cannot coexist, where the only certainty is that someone, somewhere, must make a choice that will define them for the rest of their life. David Milligan made that choice 206 times, and every single one of those men died without waking, without screaming, without enduring the final hours that their wounds had promised them. Whether that makes him a murderer or a savior is a question that history has refused to answer. Perhaps because the answer depends less on what he did, and more on whether we, decades later, safe from the immediacy of that suffering, have the right to judge him at all. The field hospital records from February and March 1945 still exist, archived in a military storage facility outside London. The morphine logs are incomplete. Entire pages are missing, their absence never explained. The casualty reports list cause of death as wounds sustained in combat for all 206 men. No mention of morphine, no notation of dosage. The erasure is complete, professional, and absolute. But the names remain. And if you were to cross-reference those names with the dates of their deaths, a pattern would emerge. A cluster of fatalities occurring within hours of admission, all with severe but not immediately fatal injuries, all dying peacefully in their sleep. The pattern tells the story the records will not. David Milligan's ledger, the one he kept hidden in his kit, was never found. Some believe he destroyed it before returning to England. Others believe it still exists, buried in a drawer or locked away in some forgotten archive, waiting for a historian brave enough to confront what it contains. But whether the ledger exists or not, the truth it recorded is undeniable. 206 men went to sleep under Milligan's care and never woke. And for every one of those men, the last thing they felt was not pain, not fear, not the cold grip of death closing around them. The last thing they felt was mercy. Whether that mercy was a crime or a kindness is a question that will outlive everyone who was there to witness it. But the men who received it, the men who died in silence instead of agony, never had the chance to answer. They simply closed their eyes, felt the warmth of the morphine spreading through their veins, and let go. And perhaps, in the end, that is the only answer that matters. The war moved on. The Rhine was crossed. Victory was declared. Medals were distributed. Parades were held. And in the chaos of celebration and reconstruction, the story of one medic who used morphine as both medicine and mercy was quietly forgotten. But forgetting is not the same as erasure, and the 200 men who died in his care, who were spared the final torment of their wounds, remain in the historical record, silent, unaccounted for, but remembered. Not by history, by conscience. And that, perhaps, is where the truth of David Milligan's legacy truly lives. Not in the records that were altered, or the logs that went missing, or the official reports that sanitized his actions into something palatable, but in the quiet knowledge, carried by the few who witnessed it, that sometimes the greatest act of healing is to stop fighting death and let it arrive gently. That knowledge, unspeakable and undeniable, is what Milligan carried for the rest of his life. Not guilt, not pride, just the weight of 200 decisions that could never be undone, and the certainty that if given the choice again, he would make the same decision every time. Because mercy, in war, is not a doctrine. It is not a protocol. It is a choice made in the moment when all other choices have been taken away. And the men who make that choice do not do so lightly. They do so because someone must, and because no one else will. David Milligan was that someone. For 206 men, he was the last face they saw, the last voice they heard, the last act of kindness they received before the war took them. And whether history judges him as a healer or a killer, the men who died under his care are beyond judgment. They are simply gone, quietly, peacefully, and perhaps, in the end, that is all the mercy they needed.